Well, you're not going to see these highlights on Brian Stetler's reliable sources. Viva Frei, Montreal litigator turned YouTuber, and this is Winnie the Westie, and we have been closely watching the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, and some of the highlights coming out of that trial, they're not highlights you're going to see on the likes of Brian Stetler's reliable sources. Now, I give Brian Stetler a hard time on social media only because he is among the worst in the media industry in terms of partisan, bias, nonsense. He's right up there with Rachel Maddow. And when I say that you're not going to see these highlights on mainstream media, just read the headlines recapping yesterday's trial testimony and see if it squares with reality. From CNN, hear the lone survivor shot by Kyle Rittenhouse testify in court. Gaige Grosskreutz, the lone survivor shot by Kyle Rittenhouse in Kenosha, Wisconsin, testified in court. CNN's Shimon Prokupec reports on what Grosskreutz testimony means for the defense. By that headline and recap, you might be led through omission to think that Gaige Grosskreutz's testimony was anything but an unmitigated disaster, and that's for anyone who reads the article. Other people just read the headlines and think that Gaige Grosskreutz testimony
was not an unmitigated disaster for the prosecution.
But it doesn't stop there, and it actually gets worse in other outlets. From Wisconsin Public Radio, Gaige Grosskreutz says he thought, quote, "I was going to die," end quote, when he came face to face with Kyle Rittenhouse. Gaige Grosskreutz lost a portion of his right bicep after being shot by Rittenhouse during a protest over police brutality. These are the headlines that are actually being run, and bearing in mind how many people don't actually read past the headlines, you can easily see how so many people in the general public are misinformed by the mainstream media. That being said, not everybody has 7 to 8 hours a day to actually watch the trial being live streamed. Not everybody has 7 to 8 hours a day to watch lawyers react to the live stream of the trial. Not everybody has 2 to 3 hours to watch a live stream with me and Robert Barnes go over this, so I'm going to make a short video highlighting the most impactful moments of Gaige Grosskreutz testimony yesterday, November 8th, 2021. Now, in fairness to the prosecution, they did do a good job setting up Gaige in the early parts of his testimony as being a victim, as being a good citizen, going to the protest to administer first aid to anyone who so needed it, and apparently Gaige Grosskreutz thought it was necessary to bring a concealed firearm to that protest just in case things got a little hairy. It then came out that he no longer had his permit for his concealed carry, so he was arguably and not so arguably
unlawfully carrying a concealed weapon at a protest.
And from then on forward, it was pretty much a free fall downhill until the cataclysmic admission that Gaige Grosskreutz made a little later on. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's just start with some of the bad admissions that Gaige was forced to make during his testimony.
So after the defendant had re-racked his weapon with the rifle still aimed at me, in that moment, I felt that I had to do something to try and prevent myself from being killed or being
The
shot
gun was already out.
killed. And so I decided that the best course of action would be to close the distance between the defendant and I. You know, from there, I don't know. I mean, if it meant
You don't know? What
trying
you were
with
going to do with the pistol in your hand?
Anthony had just tried wrestling the gun, detaining the defendant. I don't know, because I never had an opportunity.
Now, I am taking for granted that most people watching this vlog are sufficiently familiar with the facts of the case, but just to contextualize where we are at in the sequence of events, right now Gaige Grosskreutz is testifying how he was pursuing Kyle Rittenhouse down the street. He doesn't want to admit that he was chasing Kyle Rittenhouse with the gun. We'll get there in a second, but he was pursuing Kyle Rittenhouse down the street after Kyle had already shot Rosenbaum. And for those of you who missed McGinnis's explosive admission in redirect by the prosecution themselves, when asked if he knew what Rosenbaum was thinking, McGinnis said, "Well, I didn't know what he was thinking. I just knew that he screamed F you and then reached for Kyle Rittenhouse's gun."
So your interpretation of what he was trying to do or what he was intending to do or anything along those lines is complete guesswork, isn't it?
Well, he said, "Fuck you," and then he reached for the weapon.
Unless you know exactly what the answer is going to be, never, ever ask a witness why.
So we are past the shooting of Rosenbaum, and now we're at a situation where a group of people are pursuing Kyle down the street, including Gaige Grosskreutz, and he admits that he feared for his life when he was pointing his gun at Kyle Rittenhouse, and that's when he got shot, but he had no intention of killing Rittenhouse. He just felt in fear of his life, and he needed to do something to protect his life, but trust him, he was never going to kill Kyle Rittenhouse. Massive admissions followed by totally incomprehensible and incongruous explanations in order to explain away those admissions, but it gets even worse from there because it turns turns out that Grosskreutz was not exactly an innocent choir boy who showed up to administer first aid to those who needed. He might have some relatively extremist affiliations himself.
You're a member of our Wisconsin Revolution, are you not?
No, I'm not.
You're a member of the People's Revolution?
No, I'm not.
Have you spoken at their rallies?
I haven't won.
And during that rally, have you made statements such as "Long live the revolution"?
I have.
And you have no affiliation with them, though.
Affiliation, yes.
Okay, there's some of those people in the crowd.
Affiliation, but not a member.
After the prosecution tries to paint Gaige Grosskreutz as a model citizen who showed up to administer first aid to anybody who needed it, it turns out he showed up with an unlawful concealed carry, that he wasn't all that innocent to begin with, and that he might very well be something of an extremist revolutionary himself. And then he denies a membership with whatever organization they're talking about, but then is forced to admit that he's affiliated with them, and to a great many people, that might be a distinction without a difference. And at the very least, it is definitely playing into this changing narrative of Grosskreutz being an innocent model citizen to being an actual instigator of violence who was just about to murder Kyle Rittenhouse. But it's not just that Gaige Grosskreutz might not be the model citizen that the prosecution painted him as. It's not just that he showed up to a violent riot with an unlawful concealed carry. It's not just that he's affiliated with extremist or revolutionary organizations. It turns out he is also a liar, and an opportunistic liar at that.
You have now filed a lawsuit in federal court, is that right?
That is correct.
Did you read that?
Yes, I did.
In that document, you again failed to mention that you possessed a firearm. Is that right?
That is correct.
So in these documents that you are filing with courts, you are leaving out the fact that you had possessed a firearm when you were shot, right?
That is correct.
This is your testimony today, and how this case turns out has an impact on your ability to try to collect your
Going right to his motivations.
That's
That
correct.
he has a financial interest in this testimony.
If Rittenhouse is convicted, your chance of getting $10 million is better, right?
I'm not entirely sure how that plays out.
It
Haven't
doesn't
had
play
any
out well
conversation with your
now.
lawyer about that?
Oh boy.
I'm not entirely sure how that plays out.
Some of you out there might actually not be too familiar with the fact that Gaige Grosskreutz is actually suing the city of Kenosha, federal employees, law enforcement for $10 million for allowing him to have gotten injured in these riots because he lost a portion of his bicep when Kyle Rittenhouse shot him. But lo and behold, it would seem that in his civil lawsuits, he kinda sorta forgot to mention the fact that he was armed when he got shot. Grosskreutz filed civil lawsuits, presumably which he swore to under oath, in which he conveniently omitted the fact that when he was shot by Kyle Rittenhouse, he had a gun in his hands that he was pointing at Kyle Rittenhouse, and it was only then that he got shot, and he forgot to mention this in his lawsuits, and then pretends to not know exactly how it works as to whether or not that omission or the fact that he was carrying a gun might impact
His chances at scoring a $10 million payday.
So in addition to his massive fall from the grace that was depicted by the prosecution, he is not just an opportunistic individual under the circumstances, he is a liar to boot. Now, part of me wants to say that above everything else, he's actually a really silly liar, because there is no way that that fact would not come out in the civil lawsuit, but the cynical part of me says that maybe, just maybe, they would have arrived at a settlement without any evidence having been adduced, whereby Grosskreutz could in fact be given something of a payday by the city of Kenosha and the federal authorities. But alas, certainly not anymore, because the entire world has now seen how Gaige Grosskreutz lied in his civil lawsuit by omission, by failing to state the rather salient fact that when he was shot in the bicep, he was pointing a gun at the person who shot him. I would like to see Stetler from reliable sources report on that.
He was pointing a gun at the person who shot him.
Not only did Grosskreutz conveniently and dishonestly omit a highly detrimental fact from his civil lawsuits, but he equally misinformed the authorities in the days following the events. Maybe Grosskreutz thought he had enough support on his team that he could get away with these lies, that no one would ask him the hard questions, but alas, litigation is a two-way street. A trial is a two-way street, and you don't just get to sit up on the stand and say your side of the events. You will get cross-examined, and the truth, generally speaking,
Tends to come out.
And speaking of the truth coming out and the admission heard round the world for anybody who was bothering to listen, Grosskreutz finally admitted this.
It wasn't until you pointed your gun at him, advanced on him, with your gun, now your hands down, pointed at him, that he fired, right?
Correct.
Oh shit! That's it.
That's it.
Directed
That's
verdict. Directed verdict on all the murder charges. Kyle knows.
Yeah.
Directed verdict on the murder charges.
He just exhaled. Kyle, he looks like he's going to cry.
How do you not acquit after that?
Look at Bigger. Look at Big Boy.
Oh,
man.
Big Boy! Oh!
In the ordinary run of things, when politics is not at play and we don't have that sort of unpredictable wild card, this trial would be over. What we saw coming from the star witness from the prosecution was an unmitigated disaster that effectively totally confirmed the defense of self-defense. But alas, there is politics at play, and there might be even more at play as relates to jury intimidation, so there is a wild card that makes this unpredictable. But if things go according to the evidence that was presented before the court, this should be an obvious case of self-defense and the charges should be dismissed. But that prediction aside, one thing I can guarantee you is that you will never see these highlights on the vast majority of mainstream media because they have a narrative to promote, they have an audience to pacify, and if they show them these actual hard admissions during the trial, the audience might actually come to understand how Kyle Rittenhouse
ought to be acquitted.
But at least for those of you who have watched this vlog, you will understand what happened at court on November 8th, and if you want friends and family who may not understand to understand, share this video with them. And with that said, if you like my videos, you like my content, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment in the comment section below because it feeds the algorithm.
And knowing is half the battle.
If you want to support the channel, all of these support links are in the pinned comment. Robert Barnes and I do weekly streams every Sunday. We do weekly streams with a guest every Wednesday called The Sidebar. You can also find us and support us on Locals, where supporters get lots of exclusive content, but general members get lots of free content, and you can find us at
VivaBarnesLaw.locals.com.
My content is also on Rumble, so you can watch it there, but more important than any of that, take care of yourselves, check in on friends and family, make sure everyone around you is doing well, and now you know your vlog. Peace out.